Good morning. It's certainly good to be with you this morning. And as Bo mentioned, we have a lot of visitors here. We want you to know that we appreciate you being here very much. We hope that you are encouraged by the things that we are doing here. And if you have any questions about what we're doing or why we do it, we would love to visit with you about it. But it's good to see so many people here for various reasons. And we hope that you can come back if you're able. This morning, I want to talk about the subject that's found in John chapter 7 and verse 24 when it talks about righteous judgment. You know, when the Bible is used to expose sin and error, it is not uncommon to hear the guilty reply that it is wrong to judge them. And oftentimes, they'll use Matthew chapter 7 and verse 1, and they'll say, "Judge not that you be not judged." And they will use it just as that, and they will say that whatever you are saying to them should not be said because we are not to judge. We live in a world, in a society, and I know that, we've said this multiple times. I think that every generation probably thinks that their generation is the worst generation that's ever came, and how are we ever going to recover? How's the church ever going to survive? When you do history, or if you learn about history and you learn about the Romans and how wicked they were, maybe we've gotten pretty bad, but I think that there's some generations that have gotten pretty wicked. When it comes to sacrificing to certain idols and the things that they would do, it was pretty bad. But we do live in a society and a culture in which the popular theme is presented to us in every facet that we can imagine, whether it be online or through the news or on movies, that we are to be tolerant. And that the idea of us making a judgment in any way about someone's life or the way that they are living that life is completely ridiculous. And for someone to do that, they are villainized and they are, we use the term, and most of you know, canceled. There's an idea that if someone has the gall to tell someone else they are wrong for whatever it is, as wicked as it can be. They've come up with new terms for people that are pedophiles because the idea of saying that they are wrong is just, that's too harsh. That is what happens when a society or a culture goes away from God, starts calling what is evil good. They start to say that everything is okay. You cannot draw the line anymore. So we as Christians have an obligation and a duty and a responsibility to judge righteous judgment. I think sometimes Christians are discouraged and they say, well, someone says to me, judge not that you be not judged, and they're right. I'm not sinless. Who am I to say? They think the idea that judging with righteous judgment is an option. It's a commandment. We are to do. In order to do that, there are things that we must present within our lives, that we need to make sure that our conscience is clear and that we are before God blameless. But it doesn't mean that we don't judge. If Matthew chapter 7 verse 1 forbids all types of judgment, then Jesus would contradict himself in John chapter 7 and verse 24 when he says to judge with righteous judgment. There are some judgments that are condemned by God, and there are some that he calls on us to make. And we have to be able to discern the difference, to know what is righteous judgment. First, I want to look at a few judgments that I think that we should cease, because God condemns them. First one is hypocritical judging of others. In the New Testament, this was a common problem. I would say probably one of the most common problems that Jesus pointed out that the Pharisees had. That they were hypocrites. And it was constantly pointed out to them that they were saying one thing out of, and doing another. And he says in Matthew chapter 7 and verse 1, the text that was read, that Ron read, "Judge not that you be not judged. For what judgment you judge, you will be judged. And with what measure you use, it will be measured back to you. And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me remove the speck from your eye, and look, a plank is in your own eye? Hypocrite! First remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. I think I've talked about this before, and I think that, this idea of the speck and the beam is almost a comical illustration of the way that we sometimes treat sin in our lives and in those lives of the people that are around us. And the idea that if I have a beam sticking out of my eye, that I am so concerned with the speck in your eye. And as I've said before, what we have to realize is that even if I have a beam in my eye, it doesn't justify the speck that is in yours. It may be glaring and it may be worse in any way that you can categorize it, but if sin is pointed out, it doesn't matter if the person that is doing it is wrong. The responsibility falls on the person who has sin in their life. They will have to answer for the way that they present it. If they do not have the proper motive, the proper love, the proper spirit, they're going to have to answer for that. But we as Christians cannot justify continuing in sin because the person who presented that sin to us or showed us the sin in our life did it in a wrong manner. It doesn't justify it. In fact, I'd say it's one of the most useful tactics of the devil, is that he will use Christians that are hypocritical, and I think that it is a huge danger to the church when hypocrites go and profess that they are members of the church of Christ, that this is where they attend. They are standing for truth. They are standing for godliness. But yet they do things in their life that do not profess that. There is nothing, and I say this because I've seen it in my own life. Personal experience when I was in school. There were certain things that I made a stand for that no one else in my class did. Because I was told, because I was quite a bit younger, this was the rule that was set down. We weren't going to do this or we weren't going to do that. And I looked different. And I had an opportunity to explain why I was different. But I didn't. I wanted to try to, well, that's just my parents' rule, or, that's just kind of how they believe. I was so embarrassed by looking different that I didn't stand up for truth. And I regret it all the time. For what? When I was in high school or junior high, middle school, I wanted to be liked. I had an opportunity that my parents or those that cared about me showed me an avenue that I could stand apart, and people asked me, why are you doing this? And I denied Christ. In the same way that Peter did on the day of crucifixion. And some might say, well, Tyler, you don't be so hard on yourself. You were young. You were young. You didn't have to, when you get older, you realize you make mistakes. And when you're young, you make those mistakes. Look at Joseph. Did he have some justification because he was young, and when Potiphar's wife was trying to constantly lay with him and he fled from her over and over again, could we say, well, Joseph, if you would have done it, we would have understood. You were young. It's difficult. You were put in a tight spot. I understand the difficulty that you were in. She was so forceful. She was constantly nagging you and pestering you. I understand. Being young is not a justification. And I will tell you that even in my own life, I will say that the influence that you can exert or show as a young person carries so much weight because it is so unique. I'm not, saying that when you get older it's not different or that it's somehow less. But when a young person, especially in the world that we have today, stands up for truth and stands up for God, it stands out. And it will be something that people wonder why. And whether or not they agree with you, I've seen most of the time, they respect you. So when we are living our lives, we cannot be hypocrites. It is not a justification for people to continue in sin, but it is often the reason that they do so. If we have harsh, bitter, fault-finding spirit in which we go and we try to point out other sin, it will come back and haunt us. In Romans chapter 2 and verse 1, he says, therefore you are inexcusable, O man, whoever you are who judge, for in whatever you judge another, you condemn yourself. For you who judge practice the same things. But we know that the judgment of God is according to truth against those who practice such things. You therefore who teach another, do you not teach yourself? This is verse 21. You preach that a man should not steal. Do you steal? You say, do not commit adultery. Do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? We cannot be hypocritical in our judgment. We cannot judge by appearance. You know, oftentimes I think that this is a trap that we fall into because this is oftentimes something that we see in the world. In John chapter 7, the context in which this righteous judgment comes up, the Pharisees said in verse 19, or it says in verse 19, did not Moses give you the law? This is Christ speaking. Yet none of you keeps the law. Why do you seek to kill me? The people answered and said, you have a demon. Who is seeking to kill you? Jesus answered and said, I did one work and you all marvel. Moses therefore gave you circumcision, not that it is from Moses, but from the fathers, and you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath, so that the law of Moses should not be broken, are you angry with me because I made a man completely well on the Sabbath? Do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. Leviticus chapter 12 and verse 3, the Israelites were commanded to circumcise on the 8th day. And if that fell on the Sabbath, they circumcised. And Jesus is pointing out the inconsistency in their judgment. That they would do one thing, and he was healing people, and they said, do you have a demon? Jesus was constantly showing them that making a judgment based on appearance was wrong. Making a judgment based on flesh or worldly standards is wrong. In John chapter 8, without reading the entire context, in verse 15, Jesus says, you judge according to the flesh, I judge no one. If we use worldly standards to make judgments, we are going to have worldly results. That's just the fact. If we let the world creep in and decide what is right, what is wrong, where it falls on this scale of sin, that although that we know that that's incorrect, we somehow find ourselves falling into, that there's a scale of sin, and depending on where this person's sin falls on this mental scale, then we understand that maybe I don't need to actually correct them right now. It's not that big a deal. What you will find is a generation that no longer calls that sin eventually, if it's not corrected. We cannot use the world's standards for what is right and what is wrong. In 1 Samuel chapter 16, we see an example of someone judging by appearance. It says, so it was when they came, they looked at Eliab and said, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. It's oftentimes, and we even talked about, in one of our Proverbs class recently, this idea that over time, especially as we get older, we feel like, sometimes we have a pretty good idea of being able to read people. Jeremiah brought this up, that I have the ability to be able to read people, and that somehow translates into the idea that I can almost judge their heart. Now, in the world, if you tell anyone that they're doing anything wrong, they will say, you're judging my heart, that's not for you to do. Or oftentimes, I guess that's usually used by people that are in the church that have this understanding. But it is not our place to judge the heart. We don't know. That's for God. And that's very important. But there are actions that we can judge. And that is how we know a man. That is how you know how people are. We see mannerisms or things that they do, the way that they talk, the way that they act, how they present themselves. Those are actions in which a judgment can be made, whether good or bad. But when we try to discern the thoughts of the heart, we are stepping into a very dangerous boundary that only God knows. And we can't do that. It says over and over again in the Bible that is for the God. Verse says, for the man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. In James chapter 2, an example of judging by outward appearance, says in verse 1, "My brethren, do not hold the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory, with partiality. For if there should come into your assembly a man with gold rings and fine apparel, and there should come in a poor man in filthy clothes, and you pay attention to the one wearing fine clothes, and say to him, you sit here in a good place, and say to the poor man, you stand there, or sit here at my footstool, have you not shown partiality among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts?" How often do we do this? Maybe not this exact example in which we have two people come in the doors at the same time, and one's wearing costly pearls and another one's poor, and we actually tell them, sit at my footstool. That's extreme. But do we treat people differently because of their social status? And if you've caught yourself, why do you do that? It's because we let the world creep into what we think is important. When we see someone that has money and has a lot of status and has a lot of power, they have a lot of influence, do you treat them the exact same as you would someone that is homeless, that has no food, that smells bad, that is dressed bad, that they have holes in their clothes? Do you treat those people the same? And be honest. I would say that I know for a fact that I probably would treat them differently. I would hope that I would treat them the same. I know for a fact that I should treat them the same. But if I'm being completely honest, my natural instinct, I would probably talk to them differently. I would treat them differently. And that's wrong. And it is an exact example of what he says here in James. Do not treat them differently. It's a danger when we let the world, the status of life, become a basis for the judgment that we have. In rash judgments, we shouldn't have rash judgments. That's something we should cease. In Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 13, it says, "He who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him." In chapter 15 and verse 28, "The heart of the righteous studies how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours forth evil." Paul was a victim of rash judgment. In Acts chapter 21, in verse 27, it says, "Now when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews from Asia, seeing him in the temple, stirred up the whole crowd and laid hands on him, crying out, 'Men of Israel, help! This is the man who teaches all men everywhere against the people, the law in this place, and furthermore, he also brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place.'" Verse 29, "For they had previously seen Trophimus, the Ephesian, with him in the city, whom they supposed that Paul had brought into the temple. And they were ready to lay hands on him because they thought that he had taken someone to the temple." How often do we make rash judgments, premature judgments, before we actually know a matter? Matthew Pool's commentary talks about these rash judgments in 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 5. It says, "Therefore judge nothing before the time until the Lord comes, who will bring to light the hidden things of darkness and reveal the counsels of the heart. Then each one's praise will come from God. The secret things of which it is impossible that those who do not know the hearts of men should make up a judgment. Do not judge them before the time when God will certainly come to judge all men." There are things, as we said before, that are matters of the heart that only God can judge. But we have to be careful and not say that, well, everything then therefore is a matter of the heart. There are actions, as we said, that we can judge. And we cannot judge or be critical or condemn other people's liberties. In Romans chapter 14, in verse 3, it says, "Let not him who eats despise those who do not eat, and let not him who does not eat judge him who eats, for God has received him. Who are you to judge another servant? To his own master he stands or falls. Indeed, he will be made to stand, for God is able to make him stand." In verse 10 it says, "But why do you judge your brother? Or why do you show contempt for your brother? For we shall all stand before the judgment seat of Christ." In verse 13, "Therefore let us not judge one another anymore, but rather resolve this, not to put a stumbling block or a cause to fall in our brother's way. We must be able to allow others to exercise their conscience in areas of authorized liberties without condemning them." And it's very important that we understand exactly what that sentence is saying. Authorized liberties. Not anything that we determine is therefore a liberty because that's what we decided it is. There are liberties that the Bible talks about and things that the Bible maybe isn't perfectly specific about. Those generalities in which we have liberties. And someone does something that bothers us. I know the example of eating meat is an example that is used here that kind of, I wouldn't say is foreign to us because we've studied the Bible, but it's not something I think that most of us run into. The idea of offering meat to idols, and is that a big problem? Do you run into that a lot in your time? Probably not. But the idea of having liberties in which we say, well, we've always done it this way. We've always, I remember, when there was a change from, having Sunday night services, there were people that had I guess you could say, kind of fell on the line of, well, is this actually right? Is it okay that we don't do this? Because they had done it so long. It had become the law because of tradition. Now, over time, I think that they've seen that it was a matter of, a decision made by the elders. It's not to say that you can't meet on Sunday night or it's wrong, or I'm not going to open up that can. I think it's been long enough. Nobody's too sensitive about it. But it's a matter, the elders have decided the times in which we meet. And there are times in which things, as passionate as we may be about it, we cannot judge someone on those liberties, whether they do them or not, no matter how passionate we feel about it. But this is not saying that we cannot judge what is sinful. It's saying that we don't criticize when liberties are different than ours. So how are we supposed to judge? If these are the ways in which we know that we're not supposed to judge, how do we judge? Well, I think we need to judge with righteous judgment, as we found in John chapter 7, verse 24. Well, how is that? John chapter 5 and verse 30, he says, I can of myself do nothing. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is righteous, because I do not seek my own will, but the will of the Father who sent me. If there is any question about whether the judgment that you are making on someone else is right or wrong, go to the source in which that judgment is being made. And if it is based upon yourself, then you need to question it. But if it is based in truth, then you can stand back and you can let the gospel do its work. Because that's what God promises. And we don't have to be offended. And we don't have to be felt bad or feel guilty when we tell someone is doing something wrong when we're using the Word of God. Because it is the power. It is not in and of ourselves. We have to use the right standard. Hebrews chapter 1 in verse 1 says, God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in time past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, through whom he has also made the world. And in Romans chapter 10 and verse 17, so then faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. The only way in which you can make righteous judgment is to use the right standard. It's the only way. We've talked about standard before when it comes to authority, when it comes to the things that we practice in our lives as Christians. And when we think of that standard, we have, a tape measure, for example. If I have a standard tape measure and I said this is a certain width, we can use a tape measure to measure that. And that's our standard. It doesn't matter if I say, I don't care, I don't want the tape measure. I'm saying this is 6 feet wide. Don't measure it. I'm telling you it's 6 feet wide and you need to take my word for it. Well, you can obviously tell that it's not 6 feet wide, no matter how passionate I am about it. This is an extreme example. But if I told you, if I had measured this and knew that it was 3 feet wide, and I told you that it was 3 foot 4 inches, that's a little bit closer. You may not actually measure it then. If I told you that I measured this and it was 3 foot 4 inches, and you said, can I measure it myself? And I said, no. Don't open your Bible. Don't get the tape measure. I am telling you, my whole life, I have been told that this is 3 foot 4 inches. My dad said it. My grandfather said it. My great-great-grandfather. That's how long this pulpit's been around. 3 foot 4 inches. I have been told that. And if I say it with the right vigor and I tell you this passionately enough, then you might say, maybe it doesn't matter. Okay, 3 foot 4 inches, it doesn't matter. This is an example. I hope y'all know that. It doesn't. I actually don't know. I'm going to be curious how wide this is. I should have probably measured that. But let's just say, for the sake, that I had. Okay? It doesn't matter if I tell you that this is something that is 3 foot 4 inches when I know for a fact that it's 3 inches or whatever, or 3 feet. It doesn't matter. Because the standard has to go, we have to go back to the standard. Whether your father, your grandfather, your great-great-grandfather, and you could go back 6 generations, has done something in the church. When you read the Bible and you find that they're doing it wrong, it means that it needs to change. So often, this excuse that, well, there's no way that this many generations could be wrong. But yet we as Christians go out into the world and we try to tell people to come out of denominationalism. And they say, if I do that, then I condemn my loved one to hell. If you're saying that I am wrong for the way that I am living, that means that my parents, my grandparents, my great-great-grandparents are wrong. And we say, yes, absolutely, come on over. But yet we ourselves don't investigate ourselves. And this is how a church can fall into apostasy, is when you have a generation that does not dig for truth. And they get into a habit of doing the same things that a generation before did. Maybe the generation before them was wrong and they didn't know it. Maybe it wasn't out of ignorance, or that wasn't because they were trying to be defiant. They just didn't know and they were doing something wrong. And we continue that pattern. I think there's an example of man, I just thought of it and then it left me. Something about you cut off the end of your bread and you put it in the oven. And you always did that because your mother did it, and you never know why. I don't remember what it was. But something was, this is a horrible example, and I know I'm... The purpose of the example is this. Someone had a piece of bread, and they cut the end off, and they put it in the oven. And the next generation does the same thing, and the next generation does the same thing. And someone asked them, why do you cut the end off that bread before you put it in the oven? So my grandma, that's how she did it. Or my mom, that's how she did it. And you go to that generation, why did you do it? Well, that's how my mom did it. And then they go on, and you finally get to the source of the one who started cutting off the bread, and they say, why do you do that? And they say, I didn't have a pan that the bread fit in. But you continue to do these things, and you don't know why, but it's just what seems right. We have to make sure that that doesn't sneak into the church. We have to have the right standard, and we have to have the right motive. John chapter 6 and verse 38 says, for I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. When you make a judgment upon the life of someone else and the sin that you see that they are exhibiting in their life, and you are trying to show them that it is wrong, it is imperative that you have the right motive, that you love them and that you want to save their soul. As we said before, the motive of the person showing the error in someone's life doesn't remove the responsibility of the person being corrected. However, it could put you in sin as well. If I do something because I'm angry with you and I try to show you that you're wrong because I'm mad at you, then I'm going to have to answer to God for that. The motive has to be because it's God's will. It has to be because we love God and we want to seek God, or we want to see God. But there are judgments that we are going to have to make. And we cannot let the world make us feel guilty because we are making judgments upon someone. We have to judge what is right. Luke chapter 12 and verse 57 says, yes, and why, even of yourselves, do you not judge what is right? We must judge what is holy and what is defiled. Matthew chapter 7 and verse 6, do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample under their feet and turn and tear you in pieces. We have to judge false teachers, and we do that by their fruits. In Matthew chapter 7 and verse 15, beware of false prophets who come in to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes, or figs from thistles? Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Therefore, by their fruits you will know them. We cannot make an assessment on someone who we think is a false teacher if we never hear what they have to say. And a false teacher who was trying to defile a congregation or bring someone astray, they will make their fruits known. They will state it. We will see it. And we will be able to judge it. Because it's based on error. Or because it goes against error. 1 John chapter 4 and verse 1, he says, Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits, whether they are of God. Because many false prophets have gone out into the world. It's a responsibility that we have as Christians to see what someone is teaching, what they are preaching, what they are professing in their life. Judge it against the standard that is God's word, and if it is wrong, to show them that it is wrong. And if they get mad at us, we can't do anything about that. It's difficult because I think that even, I used to think that this was just going to be something maybe during school, and you get out of school and you start to get older. Maybe it doesn't happen as often. But the reality is that most of us here want to be liked. We want people to like us. We may say, I don't care what anybody thinks. People that usually care of what people think are the ones that often say that the most. I don't care what anybody thinks about me. And they're telling you this because they want you to know, hey, I don't care what you think about me. But we have this idea that we want to be liked. And there's nothing wrong with that. Where we have to be very careful is how much do we want to be liked? And what's it at the expense of? Is it at the expense of telling someone they're wrong? If you're willing to do it for someone in your family that you love and that you care about, are you willing to do it for another brother or sister in the church? Or does that fall into a category of, well, maybe someone else can do that or talk to them. I'm not close enough to them. We want to be liked. We don't want someone to be mad at us. We also have to judge truth from error. 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 14 says, But the natural man does not receive the things of the Spirit, for they are foolishness to him, nor can we know them because they are spiritually discerned. But he who is spiritual judges all things, yet he himself is rightly judged by no one. There are times I think that we as Christians go through these peaks and valleys of our life. And we have different peaks and valleys of our spiritual strength. And we may be able to look back on moments in which we know that we were our strongest spiritually. We were constantly wanting to listen to the Word of God being taught. We wanted to hear gospel songs being sung. We wanted to hang out with other Christians. We wanted to talk about spiritual things. And there are times in our life in which we know that we maybe perhaps were in a spiritual low, in which those things didn't necessarily interest as much as they used to. And our goal is to get back into that point in which we crave those things and we are passionate about those things. But we cannot use the excuse that, well, I don't know where I'm at in my life if I can make this proper discernment or judgment on what they're doing because I know that I'm not as spiritually strong as I should be. Well, yeah, that's true. You need to make that right. But it doesn't change the fact that we have an obligation and a responsibility to our brothers and sisters in Christ. And I promise you that there is no Christian that has ever lived, that has ever been corrected for something that was happening in their life, that they didn't look back on and say, I know that was done because they wanted to save my soul. Their motive may have been wrong, but if someone goes with the proper spirit and then they do it out of love, it's something that's appreciated. It's difficult to do, and it's difficult to hear, and it's usually a conversation that you get really nervous about, you start to sweat about, you're anxious about it, you don't want to do it. But 9 times out of 10, after you do it, you are so relieved You're relieved because you know you did what God wanted you to do. And you're relieved because you know that you can stand justified again. Because there is nothing that I think that weighs on the conscience of someone who's a Christian than not telling someone the truth about the gospel. We look at Peter and we look, how does Peter deny Christ? This is a man who Jesus was almost as close to as anybody. He walked with God and saw every miracle. And he was his closest friend. And in the moment that Jesus needed him, he denied him again, and again. And I cannot imagine the pain that he felt when he looked across and he locked eyes with Jesus. I've thought about that multiple times. The pain that he would have felt. And there are a lot of people in the world that could have said, Peter, if you'd have just went off, I would have understood it. You sat there and you denied Christ. And he made it right. We know that he was a pillar for the church. When we do not judge truth from error, we are denying Christ. We have to judge what sin is, and we have to stop sinning. In Hebrews chapter 5 and verse 14, it says, "But solid food belongs to those who are full age. That is, those by reason who have use, have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil." We have to judge what is sin among the saints and discipline it. 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 3 says, "For I indeed, as absent in the body, but present in spirit, have already judged, as though I were present, him who has done this deed. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, when you are gathered together, along with my spirit, with the power of our Lord Jesus Christ, deliver such a one to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord Jesus." It's a responsibility that we have to judge what is sin and discipline it if it is amongst us. When we use the right standard and the right motive to judge, we're not setting ourselves up as judges. James chapter 4 and verse 11 says, "Do not speak evil of one another, brethren. He who speaks evil of a brother and judges his brother speaks evil of the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver who is able to save and to destroy. Who are you to judge another?" When Jesus is telling us to judge with righteous judgment, he is giving us the avenue in which that judgment can be made. It is not based on our own ideas or theories, or we would have 1,000 different ideas of what is right. He is telling us, this is the standard in which you make judgment. You show them this. When they deny this, they deny me, and they will have to answer for it. When we get rid of this and we start to come up with our own opinions, that's when we get into a very dangerous ground. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 says, "Test all things, hold fast what is good, abstain from every form of evil." We are applying God's judgments so that we may hold fast what is good and abstain from every form of sin, and to teach others God's will to those things that pertain to life and godliness. And as it says in 2 Peter chapter 1 and verse 3. In Acts chapter 17 and verse 31, we all stand before Christ and be judged by him. It says there, "Because he has appointed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by the man whom he has ordained, he has given us assurance to this by raising him from the dead." When we live our lives in this world, there are going to be a lot of people that tell us that we cannot make any type of judgment upon them. And that any judgment we make, no matter how much we try to show them the Scriptures, is wrong. And that it's not our place. So we have to be very careful that we don't do it in the ways that we talked about that are wrong, but that we do it based on the standard of what God has given us. We haven't talked about it this morning, but we, of course, want to offer the invitation. If there is any here that have heard the Word and that have believed that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and you want to be baptized, that invitation is always there. It's not just at the end of every sermon or just on Wednesday nights. That invitation is always there, and it's Jesus' invitation in which he invites you to become a part of him. You may be here this morning and you've fallen into this trap of doing these things that you know are ungodly, and you need the prayers of the congregation. Whatever your name may be, we invite you to come forward while we stand and sing the invitation song.